Hey, Clip.
Hey, Mia.
How you doing? You look so good. All right, so I have 5 minutes, and I'm gonna start this so that Mia, I don't have to look at Mia the whole time. Hi. I'm here with GenerationFIVE, and we are an organization whose mission is to end child sexual abuse within 5 generations. Excuse me. You can clap. So one of the ways we're going to do that is through the use of transformative justice. How many people here have heard of transformative justice? Right. Great. So really what we're talking about at the crux of it is figuring out ways to respond to violence that don't collude with systematic violence or state violence. When I say systematic violence, I mean systems of privilege and power and oppression. I mean things like communal violence. We're not into vigilantism either. And when I say state violence, I mean things like we don't believe that prisons are the way, we don't believe that the police are going to save us, we don't believe the courts are necessarily either, because transformative justice came about because a lot of people were like, we don't look to the courts and government for protection. Most of us are looking for how we can be protected from the courts and the government. When we say transformative justice, we want responses to violence that center healing and resiliency, that begin to build community safety. We want responses to violence that have an analysis around trauma, which moves things from, oh, you're just being a horrible person and treating me like crap, to actually that's maybe the way that you've gotten here today. That's the way you've learned how to survive. And we need to start talking about trauma because every single person in this room carries legacies of trauma, whether it's your own from surviving violence in this lifetime or generational trauma. But really one of the deepest questions about transformative justice for us is how do we build community-based responses to violence that's happening in our communities? How can we demand that the state be accountable if we can't even be accountable to each other? How can we demand that corporations treat their workers better and pay them fairly and give them health care when we don't even do that in our own movements? We don't even have, we have people working so much more than 40 hours a week and not paying them what their time is worth. And I'm not saying that everything has to be compensated by money, but I am asking a real question about accountability for us as people in movements, as well as people who are connected to families and communities. Our work at GenerationFIVE is about ending child sexual abuse. We are using transformative justice, and we see child sexual abuse as one of the very, very important pieces that we all need to be committed to ending in our movements. One, because I see child sexual abuse is connected to all different forms of violence, and many people, whether they are survivors of other forms of violence, end up being survivors of child sexual abuse first and foremost. It is the building blocks of oppression. It is the first place that the most vulnerable and youngest members of our community are learning about what power and control looks like, learning about shame and blame, learning how to collude in violence, and we want to stop it. I also see the way that it is impacting all of our movements. My work in reproductive justice with Spark Reproductive Justice now in Atlanta, Georgia, over and over and over again, I would meet people who were survivors of child sexual abuse, and that was the reason they didn't seek services, reproductive health services. Not because they didn't have access or because they didn't have a state-issued ID or because it wasn't free, but because their experience with child sexual abuse impacted how they thought about sex, how they thought about reproduction, how they thought about healthcare and their bodies. And we have to talk about child sexual abuse as part of all of our movements. We see the connection between intimate and state violence, and we don't believe that we can just fight against state violence without also fighting intimate violence. They are interdependent on each other. They survive together. They depend on each other to move forward. It's not going to happen that the state is magically going to be accountable to us when after the meeting we still go home and beat each other up or rape each other, or don't even be accountable for the harm that we cause when we say harsh things to each other. I want to say that after all of that, I'm also a disability justice activist, and I appreciate the words around accessibility, and I also want folks to be mindful about how ableism is playing out in this space and in this conference. And I see ableism as one of the main, connected with other systems of oppression, as being one of the main things that creates the conditions for violence, because it creates dependency. And I want to end on this note. All the best analysis is worthless if we don't know how to treat each other well. As you're going through the conference and you're learning all this great information, I want you to remember that we need each other. Our sharp analyses should lead us to know that we will need each other to end violence, we will need each other to shut prisons down, we will need each other to end oppression. If we don't know how to work together and how to treat each other well in that process, it doesn't matter how smart we are or how smart we sound. So please, think about how you're treating each other and how you can really build community with folks in this space, and take care of each other. Thank you.